Hi, this is Dr. Frank with the Church of Rational Truth. Today we're going to talk a little bit about building intimacy and trust in relationships. This is basically the advice I give a lot of my patients when they come in for couples counseling, therapy, whatever you want to call it. Basically, when we deal with issues, there's a couple of things that almost always come up and that are a big issue in terms of trying to gain intimacy in a relationship. And that is a huge issue that I have with a lot of couples. And usually there's a couple of steps that I like to take with them. The first step is usually good, open, and honest communication. A lot of relationships struggle with this where they can't effectively give information back and forth. And that's really all that communication is just transferring bits of data from one person to another. The first step is making sure that the communication is getting through, that it's accurate, and that the both parties are actually being heard. A lot of times it's kind of like one person is speaking French and the other speaking Spanish. They're close and you can kind of get some words back and forth, but if things are getting lost, things are getting mixed, and the meaning is really not getting through. So a lot of times if I'm doing counseling, I'll usually act as the intermediary or the referee, and I'll try to make sure that the ideas are getting across from one person to the other. And the other big thing is actually making sure that those ideas are heard. A lot of times it's talk, 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 no listen on the other side, and both sides are just waiting for their turn to talk. There really isn't a back and forth, or there's really not an understanding or an interpretation or actually taking in that information. Good communication isn't just sending, it is sending and receiving, digesting, and then understanding. So that's usually one of the first steps that I take in terms of building a relationship or getting towards intimacy. The second step that I normally like to take is working on building trust. And usually that's done verbally. Why do we have to? You can do it through actions, but a lot of times first getting that good communication leads us to start building trust. We talk, we understand each other's needs, we understand what others are looking for, and then from that good communication we can start building trust. We start showing that the other person can trust us. We explain what our worries are, we get rid of lies, we get rid of deceit, being open and honest and clear with the other person. That is what builds trust. The hard thing is trust is really easy to lose. All it takes is one slip up, one lie, cheating, something small. We've had issues with people making accounts in different names, or just hiding accounts, or hiding money is always a huge issue. Talking with members of the opposite gender. A lot of those things that get hidden or get lied about, or sometimes it's just not talked about, and those cause distrust. One event can cause a huge amount of distrust, and it takes a whole lot of trust to counteract that. It takes a whole lot of actions to prove the trust, to kind of outweigh even one thing that makes someone lose trust. So usually the second step in terms of gaining that intimacy is working on that level of trust. Then usually I work on opening up emotional intimacy. This is really a little bit more geared to women. I don't want to divide this on genders because it's not necessarily always like that, but many times it's important to but to open up a emotional intimacy, because for many people both sexual intimacy and emotional intimacy are linked. It's not always the case. Once again, hate being sexist, but many times for men, intimacy sexually and intimacy emotionally can be two very different things. In fact, sometimes there's a huge line between them, or sometimes there's not even a care for the emotional intimacy. Not always just men, it can happen with women, but if you're going to be stereotypical about it, that is generally what is considered, and you see it more often, I would say, is that men don't have that connection, and that women more have that connection. Many times that people, I'll just say people, we won't go on to the sex lines, people many times do need that emotional intimacy to have that level where they can actually have the physical intimacy, many times because it's tied, many times because you need the trust. And so what will happen is you go from gaining trust to then starting to be emotionally intimate. Now, what does that mean? This is basically just going down further in terms of trust. It is letting down your shield, letting down your walls, getting rid of the face or the mask that we all wear, and being kind of vulnerable to the person that you care about, telling them things that you probably wouldn't tell other people, letting them see the real you, or get to a level of closeness you wouldn't get with other people emotionally on a verbal, non-physical side. Just like how physical sexuality, you don't do that sort of thing with your friends and neighbors, this is basically the same thing but with emotions. This is the talking version of sex. It is basically, I am letting my guard down, I am letting you to get very close to me on a personal level, but just with talking, not actually physical. This is kind of a good way of building trust, feeling safe with someone, because you are giving them the option of really hurting you. You're letting down your guard, and if someone wants to stab you or hurt you or take advantage, they can do it. And that builds a lot of trust when you can do that. When you can do that and know that your partner is not going to take a shot at you, or that your partner isn't going to use it against you or hurt you when you are vulnerable, that helps build a lot of trust. And that's kind of the next step down that trust line, is that you can start edging further and further towards that cliff and know that you're not going to fall off. And then usually after that emotional trust is built up, then I usually say that is the time to work on the physical trust, or the physical intimacy. Because if you don't have that strong base, especially if this usually is a conversation I have with people who have previous sexual trauma, if you don't have all those other layers of trust, it's really hard to get to that last level, because we're talking about opening yourself up and being vulnerable. Physical sexuality is one of the most vulnerable states we are at. We are naked, we are out bare, and someone could absolutely take advantage and hurt you in a very significant way. So you need to have that level of trust to know that that person isn't going to hurt you. They're going to have your best interests at hand. They're not going to do anything purposefully that is going to harm you. And that is why you need to build up all that intimacy before you can actually get to that physical intimacy. I've discussed this with patients all the time. The easy thing is saying it. Actually doing it in practice, actually going through those steps with a partner and being able to build that trust is much harder. People lie, people cheat, people steal, people are not empathetic, people are not open to listening, people a lot of times don't show that they care for their partner. And those are a lot of things that stop people from being able to go further on that intimacy scale, or further past that towards the physical intimacy. So it's, in any relationship, it's a constant struggle. It is something you have to work on. It's something that doesn't come overnight. But those are usually the steps that I use. That's usually the rubric if I've got a couple that's dealing with intimacy issues, in terms of how to get back to intimacy. Obviously, it's going to change a lot on the individual. It's not always going to be that cut and dry, and many times different couples have different issues at hand that they have to work on. But that's something that you have to kind of one by one on an individual basis deal with. But I think that's a general start. It's a good start for people who don't know where to begin with, and hopefully it can help some people out there who are dealing with issues with intimacy in their relationships. That's it for this lecture. Old news, the money from the last month, the passive income, is going to be going towards the church fund, the church/library fund. Our finances are not going to be done this month, because this is right on a weird switchover period, so those finances aren't done, but we'll probably do our report next week on the finances, and then have the amount of passive income that will go towards the next month. So we'll do the same thing with voting, putting up potential resolutions for where that money is going to go, and then we'll do that like we normally do. That is it for today. Thank you so much if you did watch to the end. This is Dr. Frank with the Church of Rational Truth, signing off.